Welcome to Everything STEAM. I'm your host, Sam Stanford. As a physicist and structural engineer with Jacobs Engineering, I've made many connections with some bright individuals who are either working, studying, or self-taught and passionate about our particular topics of discussion. This episode is super exciting for many reasons. First and foremost, it is because we will be covering the Great Lakes. Both my guest and myself have a lot of history with the Great Lakes within our short lifespans. Additionally, my guest is one of my favorite science communicators, and throughout this episode, we'll be focusing on her bread and butter, which is the Great Lakes, art, science communication, and her fantastic annual series called Spooky Lake Month. Speaking of my guest, let me introduce Geo Rutherford. Geo is an artist, educator, and content creator. She received a BFA from Eastern Michigan University and an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Geo is an adjunct professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee teaching two-dimensional concepts. In the summers, she is the art director at Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, and in her spare time, she co-chairs the hashtag #WhyYouMatter nonprofit. Currently, she lives in Sauk City, Wisconsin with her dog, Padfoot. As I alluded to previously, Geo is one of my favorite content creators and an extremely well-known science communicator. She shares videos regarding her art, limnology, hydrology, and much more. Currently on TikTok, she has over 1.5 million followers, including myself. So, now that you've been introduced to my guest star and the topic of this podcast, we're going to head into our first segment where we will dive into Geo's work and information about the Great Lakes. Cheers. Geo, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I went to yoga this morning, so I feel great.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. I haven't done yoga in so long. I don't even want to know what that would look like. I probably should. Anyways, happy to have you on the podcast, and I'm just really excited to do this with you. We have a lot of interesting things to talk about, and especially for this first segment, talking about your art. So I might as well just start off with this first question rather than trying to spoil anything. What is your work about?
So I make work about the Great Lakes, and all of my work is kind of centered around what's going on with the Great Lakes ecologically, what is happening with invasive species, what's happening with pollution. I'm just kind of interested in the Great Lakes as a whole. And I spend a lot of time visiting the Great Lakes beaches. A lot of my practice is about going to the beaches. And then I also share about lake-related content on my TikTok. And that's all kind of tied together. Like I always say that I'm a content creator and educator and then artist. So I kind of, so I fit under a lot of umbrellas, I guess.
I love your content, and I got to watch, I guess, one of your shorter documentaries on YouTube, which was really cool. And it did talk about like your art studio and what you do, and the beaches that you've been to, and collected some, like had some of the collections that went into, your physical art studio. So it's quite fascinating. So what kind of mediums do you use whenever you create your work?
So medium in art can apply to a lot of different stuff, but for me, it's specifically interested in printmaking and book arts. I actually went to undergrad for printmaking and fiber art, which for me was screen printing on fabric and dyeing fabric and stitching on fabric. Not so much. The irony is that I have a fibers undergrad like concentration, but I don't even know how to use a sewing machine. So I think fibers can be kind of it can be confusing outside of the craft world. And then I recently discovered book arts in grad school. So now I also do book arts.
Oh, interesting. So do you have any book arts out like right now? Sorry, that might be a really dumb question.
So book arts is, I think that if no one's ever heard of if you've never heard of book arts, then it is not what you think it is.
Okay,
right?
yeah, do explain.
So an artist book is where an artist has final control over a work of art that may or may not appear as a book.
Oh,
so
okay.
it can be a little bit manipulating because sometimes the artist book doesn't have any appearance of being a book. There's a famous book by Jessica Poor, which is a pill bottle. It's a prescription pill bottle. And on the outside of the pill bottle, it says, "A pharmacy of crippling hope. Take as many pills by mouth. It doesn't matter. You're still going to die." And you open up the book, and on the inside are pills, little actual pill capsules. And on the inside are little slips of paper. And on those slips of paper, it gives you bad advice. Eat sugar. Like, it's like all the things that kind of could kill you. And so that's a book. But if you were to come across it in the wild, you probably wouldn't think, oh, this is a book. So book arts is kind of an interesting field of art where artists are asking themselves, what is a book? Like, what defines a book? And you kind of list those, like, is it a book if it has no words? Is it a book if it has no covers, or it doesn't have any paper? Is it still a book? You know, if I can't read the book, is it a book? What if I can't open it? Is it still a book? So it's along the same lines of Joseph Kasuth, who is an artist who did a famous piece called 1 in 3 Chairs, where he put a physical chair in the studio. He put a photograph of a chair next to it, and then he put the definition of a chair next to that. Which one is a chair?
Ooh.
Right? Like, what is a chair? And that's kind of along the same lines as what people are trying to do with book. So when I make a book, it's not necessarily going to fit in your definition of book. It's not going to look like Harry Potter. It's not going to look like The Hungry Caterpillar. It's not necessarily going to fit into any of those standards. And it can be easily mixed up with art book, which is where artists put their work in photographs inside of a traditional book. And it's essentially just like, you know, for a coffee table. That's not really what I'm doing. What I'm doing is way outside of that.
Okay, see, me being the layman here, I literally went book art book, and I was like, okay, so you have books out. That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, okay, that makes a lot of sense. See, I'm being schooled. I'm learning things every day. I love it.
Yeah, my most, actually, I think I don't remember if I told you this, but my first ever viral video on TikTok, the first video I ever posted, and what actually got me my initial traction on the app was me sharing my book. And it was such a weird book, and nobody thought it was a book, that of course it went viral because 95% of the comments were, that's not a book.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was good.
Yeah, exactly. And so my foray into the TikTok world was explaining artist books and talking about artist books. And I had access to the special collections at the library, despite the fact that it was a pandemic. I still got to go in and take video of books. And I have videos that are hilarious. They don't look like my videos at all. But nobody today who watches my TikTok would be like, oh yeah, this is Geo's video. Like, they're just random videos of weird books, like a book that's completely made of glass. You know, is it a book? It has no writing in it. It has a single photograph. And sharing books like a children's board book that was like a religious board book, and then it kind of gets manipulated into an artist book where the artist like changes words in it so that it has a different meaning. That's still an artist book. So my book was a box of test tubes, which I think the science in you would appreciate. It's a box of glass test tubes. So first thing you do is you come across this box. It's blue. On the top, there's a lithograph on the top, and it says beach finds. So you're like, okay. So you open it, and you're encountering a rack of rubber capped vintage test tubes. So they're kind of like this burnt umber or like sienna test tubes that are glass. So you pull one out at a time. And as you start pulling these out, you start to realize that there's a story that's kind of being revealed through this random access narration. And each tube is filled with beach material, from the natural to the unnatural, I always say, from Mother Nature's pocket change to the Anthropocene. You have like this wide range of material that is being revealed. And by the time you get to the last tube, you kind of have this full picture of what is on a Great Lakes beach. And there you go. That's an example of one of my artist books.
That's wonderful. I actually really like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It captures, it's any way, I guess, to capture the imagination, if you want to say it, like if we want to talk about a book art rather than an art book. It's just whatever paints quote unquote paints a picture, what you're trying to deliver, what's your message with the art. And I guess there's your message, but then what the interpreter then gets out of that, I guess, doesn't have to be that same message, but maybe something quite similar. You know, it's I guess a revelation within a structure. I guess it's better to say anything other than just being a book or a pill bottle or a box of test tubes. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I love
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. So, and that's why it's kind of a fun thing to share on TikTok, because people always get fairly confused. So it does well. I always say that things that make people angry, things that make people sad, things that make people super happy, and things that confuse the crap out of people are the things that go viral on TikTok.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
those are some secrets on the TikTok world. So
Hey, we can't let them all know the secrets. So
definitely.
I'm curious, why do you embody the Great Lakes in your work? Since we've kind of hinted at it here.
Yeah, I was never really a Great Lakes fanatic. I didn't grow up in the Midwest. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, where
Mm,
the only water is like a reservoir. It's kind of this
mhm.
gnarly body of water. My parents used to row in Boulder, and I remember going to the boathouse and going to the regattas, and it was like water was always gross. Like I was always grossed out by puddles of water. It was something that I was just not that interested in. And then in the summers, we go to Ocean City, New Jersey, and see the ocean and go to the ocean. My parents were both teachers, so we'd go for like a month, something that most people wouldn't do. And we would just live at the beach for a month. And so when we moved to Ann Arbor, I started spending the summers closer to Lake Michigan, and I started to get it. I never got it before that. I don't think I ever had any education on the Great Lakes. I had a weird education though. Like I lived in Australia for a year, and like it kind of screwed up my access to earth science. Like I never had a normal earth science class, despite the fact that my mom is an earth science professor. So
Wow.
like I had earth science like in my life, but I never had an earth science class. So it was kind of a weird education. And because of that, like I feel like I just didn't even think of the Great Lakes until I ended up right next to them. And I remember the first time I was a teenager when I stood next to them and thought, what is happening? It's like like enormous, right? It's
Yeah.
just inconceivable. And it takes you hours. I remember driving from Chicago to Ann Arbor, and it's like it takes hours and hours and hours to make that drive. So that's kind of why I ended up taking the Great Lakes and going with that topic, because I just felt like it was deserved an advocate. The lakes
Yeah.
deserve someone to be bringing attention to them. They deserve someone to be making art about them. It's such an interesting topic. So when I was in grad school, I kind of just like I was in Milwaukee. I kind of skipped. Sorry, I skipped around here a little bit, but I moved to Milwaukee, and it was the first time I ever lived on a Great Lake. And Milwaukee's kind of gnarly. Like Milwaukee is like I had never thought, yet again, I had never thought about Milwaukee until I lived there suddenly. And it's right on Lake Michigan, and the entire coastline is so rocky that the only beaches, a lot of the beaches are artificial. And
Mm,
so it was kind of interesting to spend time on that shoreline, which was like kind of this totally fake shoreline. And so I was living 5 minutes from the water and just decided that it was worth the time and the effort
yeah.
and the dedication. So
Yeah, I think my appreciation for the Great Lakes, I guess, started a lot earlier than you. My family has been permanent, a permanent footing in Erie, Lake Erie in Pennsylvania for, geez, I would say at least two generations. I've went to Lake Erie my entire life, like during the summer months, I guess spring, summer, fall. So I have a pretty, interwoven tie, I guess, to Lake Erie itself. Not really any of the other lakes. I mean, I've been to Ontario maybe like 4 or 5 times. I fished up there. I've fished in Erie, Lake Michigan, not so much, just a little bit. But I love the Great Lakes, and I honestly think the history of them is extremely fascinating. Just that much body of water, fresh water, representing 20% of all the fresh water on Earth is just insane, and it's all geographically in like one area. It's
Mhm.
amazing. Yeah. I find the formation story extremely fascinating. I love geologic history. It's really cool. I took a decent amount of time before this recording just to like brief myself on it, just so I could kind of talk about it because I love it. I'm sure a lot of people know that like it happened based on, you know, the last glacial period, the Laurentide ice sheet, but aren't too familiar on, you know, it's like, oh, that's how it happened. But like it's more interesting than just that, like the formation and the recession of it.
Yeah, actually, my first science video, my first viral science video on the Great Lakes was 4.5 million views, telling people that the glacier would come and go and come and go, and that might have been why it went viral. So yes, and that shocked me too. Like yet again, I kind of had, like I said before, I kind of had a funny, like I felt like there was pockets of things I was missing in my education. So part of the reason I feel like my TikTok is so fun for me is because I get shocked about stuff all the time. So I feel like I didn't fully understand the glacial period very well. And like when do we really talk about that in school? Like it kind
No.
of gets, you know, because earth science is such a huge topic, and it ends up that we don't, you're not talking about like the history of the earth in
Mm-mm.
any of these classes in particular. At least for me, like my Midwest, you know, Ann Arbor education did not dig into the glacial period. So there's kind of like, yeah, the mammoths, and like I feel like some of my education just came from Ice Age, the movie. And and so when I kind of fully started to dig into the Great Lakes, I was like, oh my God, an ice sheet that was miles thick,
Yeah.
like 2-3 miles thick at the thickest point, was like moving across the land, and then pulling back every season. It would come forward and move back and that is mind-blowing. It was like it essentially dug the Great Lakes into the ground, which is hard to believe considering they take you 25 hours to drive around Lake Michigan now. You know, it's kind of like this,
Mhm.
it's really hard to conceive. And so that, like you were saying, the formation is just such a fascinating aspect of history. And there's other places on the planet where the glaciers did the same thing, like over Finland and Norway and all these other places. But the North America is kind of special. Like that humongous continental ice sheet was really the biggest in the world at the time. So it's kind of a fun little piece of history. Well, except for, okay, Antarctica, but we'll leave
Yeah,
that
I
on the
think
northern half.
very true. I think one of my favorite fun facts in like that whole story is that out of like the five, there's two of them that formed differently. So like the like Ontario and Superior, at the bottom of those two lakes, which they're very deep lakes, by the way, very deep. And they have at the bottom of those are basalts, which are just, you know, geologically formed volcanic rock. And it was a big head scratcher because they found first that like Huron, Michigan, and Erie were formed, and they at the bottom they have, you know, limestone or mostly dolostone or dolomite, and it was such a huge head scratcher. But they finally figured out that the that Superior and Ontario were made from rift valleys. So from a long, long time ago, they were, you know, they had the crust was splitting apart there, and they had, you know, magma cooling, and that's where you get your basalts. Over time, they filled in with sedimentary rock and sediment, and the ice sheet was literally just pulverizing that back to where you expose that rift valley. The cool thing about the other three, though, is that about 350, 380 million years ago was the Devonian period, and Laurentia, which was, you know, Canada and the United States at the time, was lowland seas. So that's where a lot of the limestone became dolostone or dolomite, which is just like the transformation of limestone into like it. What happens is like a substitution where magnesium takes the place of calcium. It makes it harder, more resistant to acid, etc. So it's a tougher rock, right? And over time, that filled in, of course, with sediment, more sedimentary rock that was also gouged out. So there's two different base layers in the I guess the 5 different lakes, which is really, really fascinating to me. So it has like 2 different origin stories, but has the same different how-to in terms of how they came about. Really, really cool. I love it.
I knew about Lake Superior because I always say that Lake Superior had an ancient volcano,
Yeah.
which is why Lake Superior agates exist. Like a lot of the rocks that are famous on Lake Superior are because of that ancient volcanic history. But I don't think I knew as much about Lake Ontario. I should probably look into that because that's really interesting. I've done videos about that period of time
Mm-hmm.
during the Laurentia, but I haven't covered that. So that's fascinating. Thanks, Sam. I didn't know
Yeah,
about that one. Now I'm
it's
gonna have to go do a deep dive.
yeah, it's actually Ontario and the entire St. Lawrence Seaway. That's that Rift Valley, which is quite fascinating. And one last thing before I guess we move on, because I'm just kind of I want to throw it out there because they're really cool fun facts for people. Is that Niagara Falls is also based out of that dolostone or dolomite, and the cool thing about it is they figured out like a rate of erosion for Niagara Falls, and they estimate it to be about 3 feet per year. So they said maybe
50,000 years.
yeah, yeah, where it could totally disappear, and then like all of Lake Erie would just drain back out. But by that time, we could be in another glacial cycle or a glacial period, which at that point wouldn't mean anything anyways because it would just dig the lakes deeper anyways.
Exactly. Fun fact, piggybacking off of that fun fact is my favorite thing. I used to talk about this all the time on my TikTok. I should actually revise it because it deserves a revisit. But the Niagara Escarpment was one of my favorite things to talk about. So we have the Niagara Falls as kind of the most well-known aspect of the Niagara Escarpment, but it goes up through Lake Huron. That's where Manitoulin Island and all of the giant islands through Lake Huron, all the way down to Wisconsin and Door County. I don't know if you know those areas, but that whole area, there's this giant archway all the way through the Great Lakes, which is harder rock than the rest, which is how you get this huge escarpment. And that's why Lake Michigan on Door County, which is near Green Bay, just for context for you, it's like the Wisconsin finger. It's like this little finger that sticks out. And half of it is like submerged into Lake Michigan, and the other half is this giant cliff face, which is part of the same Niagara Escarpment that creates the Niagara Falls. So it's kind of this fun. And there's an ancient, gigantic, enormous, ancient might be a little bit overkill, but a enormous waterfall in Lake Huron where that huge cliff led to this huge waterfall down between the two parts of Lake Huron of the Georgian Bay. I always get yelled at about that. Georgian Bay. People always yell at me about that. So I screw it up because I get yelled at and then I get like confused. But that area is kind of fun. So there's like actually a waterfall between those two. So
Wow. Okay.
also Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are technically one lake. That's like another fun fact.
That's true.
Did you know that one, Sam?
What is the famous bridge?
Mackinac Strait.
The Mackinac Strait.
Yeah, the Mackinac Straits is 5 miles across, which means that technically it's connected, but it's just easier. And even Native American names for the lakes were different, so they acknowledge these like different separate bodies of water. And so we've like always considered these as 2 different bodies of water, despite that strait. So
that's interesting. Even at being about 26,000 feet, of the strait, that they're like, oh yeah, and it's 2 different bodies because the bodies are so massive. And that leads me to, I guess, this question. So these lakes, as we've established, are huge, but why are we not calling them seas? We call other bodies that are inland seas, but not lakes. So do you want to like give that differentiation?
yeah, all of the examples of seas, a lot of these bodies of water that were historically called seas were at a time when people didn't have a universal definition of sea. So Caspian Sea, the Dead Sea, these bodies of water were named a long time ago, potentially thousands of years ago. And so the name kind of just stuck, despite the fact that now we kind of universally agree that lakes are bodies of water that are fully surrounded by land.
Okay.
And that's kind of the definition of a modern day lake. So, but there's tons and tons of examples where this is a lake might actually be like, for example, the largest lake in the world and the deepest lake in the world is the Caspian Sea, right? Or that has more volume of water. I actually think that the Caspian Sea isn't as deep as Lake Baikal. But then like the Dead Sea, which is extremely salty. And so you would think, oh, is it a sea just because it's salty? Well, no, it's still a lake. It's surrounded by land. And an example here in our backyard is the Salton Sea, which is a lake out in California that used to be a flood valley for the Colorado River. Like the Colorado River would flood, doesn't happen as much anymore, and this whole valley would fill, and sometimes even fill enough to connect it to the water, the ocean right there, and then that ended up being this like salty kind of spit of land. And so, so the Great Lakes, sometimes people call them sweetwater seas. That's kind of a like more colloquial term to refer to them as, to try to acknowledge that sheer size, but they are Great Lakes.
Interesting. I also thought it had something to do with elevation, but maybe it's just based on being surrounded by land. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and there's examples too. I actually did because I think we've confessed this already. Maybe we haven't, that I don't have a degree in science. And so when I first started this TikTok, people are like, well, what is a sea versus a lake versus a pond? Like what makes something a pond? And so I would go on these insane deep dives to try to figure out what's going on with the terminology. And there's all these lakes that are actually lagoons, or lakes that are really probably, maybe it's even a bay, or it's like an estuary and it's not even a lake, and so there's all these great examples, like Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana is technically a estuary, or maybe even a lagoon, because it's connected to the ocean. So the ocean actually flows in through the Gulf of Mexico into Lake Pontchartrain. So it's not a lake because it's open to the ocean, but it's not large enough to be ever considered a sea. But then you have something like the Sargasso Sea, which is out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It doesn't even, like, if you wanted to give the definition of a sea being that it needs to be bordered by land next, like in the ocean, but bordered by land, doesn't even qualify, because then you end up with the, the Sargasso Sea, which is just smack dab in the middle. So all of these definitions are kind of a little tricky, because you're constantly like getting challenged by, in the United States, like something that's probably oh shoot, I just brain farted on the word I was going to say. It's a fjord. And fjords are created by the glaciers as well. And so it's kind of versus a sound, right? So there's a sound, there's a fjord, there's a bight, there's a bay, there's a sea, there's an estuary, there's a lagoon. And it's like, what are these things and what are their definitions? And then you have a million examples of those definitions being thrown to the wayside, right?
Yep.
So like a bay versus a gulf. Like a gulf is supposed to have a narrow outlet where it's just a small little area. So the Gulf of Mexico is a perfect example, because it kind of gets like, there's all these things in the way, and so the exit into the ocean is fairly limited. Versus the Hudson Bay is probably also a gulf by modern definition, right? Because it has like a small exit. I'm obviously like throwing stuff out there. Like, I don't know for sure. I would be curious to hear somebody who like has professionally taken on all of the world's geological or geographical features and given them a new definition or a new term, because I find that stuff fascinating.
We need like a set of like cartographers to just go out there and just redo things. Be like, let's redefine some stuff and make this a little more clear. Honestly, for the layperson, they would probably want to know whether it's salt or fresh water. That would probably be their first, like, okay, I really don't care whether this is a fjord, a bay, a gulf, a strait, etc. I just want to know if I have to worry about drinking salt water for the next hour. That's
yeah, which is a fair concern, because then there's lakes that are like in the middle of the land, completely separated from the ocean, and people don't realize that they could be extremely salty. The Great Salt Lake, Mono Lake or Mono Lake, depending on how you say it, Don Juan Pond in Antarctica, which is essentially just a body of water that's like the consistency of syrup. Like there's just so many of these like interesting, yeah, because it's so salty, that it's syrupy. Isn't that gross?
I want
Yeah.
to know what the specific gravity is of that. Ooh,
I don't know.
that'd be horrible. So not to I just to get back on track about the Great Lakes really quick, because I don't think we touched on this. Is obviously we know that it's important, but we want to maybe explain like how important it is, both anthropologically and ecologically. Do you want to dive into that? Maybe talk about the anthro first.
I feel like what's interesting about the Great Lakes is their natural like the fact that they're just this enormous freshwater resource. That's kind of what I think ends up being historically important with the lakes, and in a modern sense, it's also super important for the way that we move forward with our access to freshwater, and the way that we use that freshwater, the way that we keep that freshwater in the Great Lakes and we don't let it just all end up in the ocean. Like those are kind of all things that I think are kind of fascinating. But anthropologically is kind of an interesting way. I don't know if I've ever said, let me just talk about the historical anthropology of the Great Lakes. You could dive in also to like, the significance to indigenous people and how the Great Lakes were like this like centerpiece of indigenous culture for a long time. And like, all of the lakes have such important roots to the first people of the United States or of North America. And that's just like ever since then, even for trade and the way that we use the lakes for moving material around the United States was kind of has an interesting history as well. Getting stuff from the St. Lawrence Seaway all the way over to Duluth is kind of this fascinating aspect of Great Lakes history, which also ties into the ecological history, because the ecological history is almost 100% tied up with colonization and the way that we opened up the Great Lakes to all of the ships of the world is what actually destroyed the Great Lakes ecology as well. So all these things are kind of interestingly braided together, and I find it kind of fascinating. So
yeah, and that's one thing I didn't even think about, maybe just to like shed some light on the indigenous peoples that like inhabited around the Great Lakes were there for, I'm just going to lowball this and say at least 11,000 years. We've only been here for a couple hundred. That's fascinating.
There's interesting archaeological evidence at the bottom of the Great Lakes as well. Like there's archaeological evidence all around the Great Lakes for these people that lived here 10,000, 11,000 years ago. But there's some interesting ones. There's they call it the Stonehenge beneath Lake Michigan. Have you ever heard of this? People kind of run wild with it. It's a row of rocks that have been placed down in a very specific way. Right. And it's interesting because it's a caribou line, where to prevent caribou like won't cross a rock line. Did you know that?
No. What?
If you put down rocks in a row, caribou will not, they're freaked out by it. They're just like, no, that looks like I can't cross that. That's a wall. It's just, they're just rocks on the ground, but the caribou are like, I think that's a wall. Huh. And so there's like a beautiful, underneath Lake Michigan, there's this beautiful evidence of the first people living here placing down these essentially like runways to try to track down and be able to hunt caribou. It kind of ends up being traced beneath the waters of Lake Michigan. So it's kind of some interesting archaeological evidence. And then, I've actually been meaning to do a video on the indigenous history of the Great Lakes. The problem is it's such a big topic. I think that's why I've kind of shied away from it. It's a big topic, and I'm always a little bit nervous about pronunciation of things that I don't, and so I haven't done a video on that, even though I know that, it'd be fun to talk about like where did the Great Lakes get their original names from. What do those names mean? How does that tie into, the modern way that we perceive or think about these bodies of water? How much access has been, like, how much access still exists for those reservations and the Native Americans that are still here today, and our ancestors to the, or not ancestors, but descendants of the, people that lived there originally. All that kind of stuff. It's kind of off topic, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, it would be interesting, even just to take like like a set amount of time and do some said videos of it, just like how you do a Spooky Lake Month. I know I didn't mean to jump ahead like 2 segments, but I just wanted to say, like, I think that'd be a really
No,
cool,
it's true.
like, idea. Yeah.
I have different like I actually need to redo my Great Lakes series because I did it originally in 2020. That was my very first ever series on the app for science. I did deep dives into all sorts of weird Great Lake stuff. Like the biggest salt mine in the world is under Lake Huron.
Oh yeah.
I made a video on it. And the history of the St. Lawrence River, and the history of the Le Griffin, which was the first ship built in Lake Erie, that then it was built in Lake Erie. It's this giant wooden, like, it looks like a pirate ship, right? And it was built in Lake Erie, and then it set off to go in, and it never was seen again. So it was built and then just immediately disappeared. And it's like one of the greatest Great Lakes mysteries is like where this ship went, because they've never been able to find it. And so, like, making videos just about all sorts of random things, like, that I find interesting about the Great Lakes. But I need to redo some of them because now they're really old. They're getting really old. But I think one of them definitely needs to be about the indigenous history. Somewhat recently about the Great Lakes invasive species history, because I find that really fascinating, which kind of gets back to that ecology and like what the ecology of the Great Lakes are and why that's important. But the Great Lakes were kind of I always say that they're babies. The Great Lakes were like a baby ecological system.
Yeah.
They were only, like you were pointing out with the history, like 11,000 years old at the very most. And a lot of the creatures a lot of the animals and wildlife that live in the Great Lakes today are, remnants of all of these other, they're new to the area, but they're remnants of just like the waterways and it's very like versus, for example, I always want to talk about Lake Baikal, as my audience knows. I joke. Actually, I think I actually changed my bio recently, and it says Lake Baikal STEAM account because it's true. I am a Lake Baikal STEAM. But Lake Baikal is 28 million years old, and it has its own, unique ecosystem that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. Like, there's animals living in Lake Baikal that can't be found anywhere else, and that's not what's going on with the Great Lakes. Well, and it's incredible too, because Lake Baikal, and I've like kind of talked about it, people call it the Galapagos of Siberia because it's so the populations are so unique. Like there's this crazy sponge creature that lives in Lake Baikal. It's like this green spongy creature that like cleans the water and like it like does all this stuff. So Lake Baikal could have like, there's all this stuff. It has giant vents connected to hydrothermal vents connected to the Earth's crust. Like there's all these fascinating things. And like Great Lakes are that's just not the case. And so when we opened up the Great Lakes, when they connected Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, we were talking earlier about the Niagara Falls. The Niagara Falls was protecting the Great Lakes. Like nothing could come up through the St. Lawrence River into Lake Ontario. Oh, Lake Ontario has always been screwed. Lake Ontario is like the catch-all for all that stuff, right? Like all that stuff ends up there first. That's why Lake Erie or Lake Ontario has the most shipwrecks too, because you have to think that like the ships were able to come across through the St. Lawrence River and then they got stuck in Lake Erie or Lake Ontario, and then they could never get any further than that. They could never get to Lake Erie, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and Lake Superior. And so they had to build something, and they ended up building the Welland Canal, which connects Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And it's kind of it actually has like some fascinating history because they really truly thought this was going to like change the world. They were like, and even at the beginning, there was like some idea that they would be able to find a passageway through Lake Superior, like out onto the other side of the United States. So there's like truly some like crazy ideas out there of like how much this would be able to like open up the world. And just kidding, it opens up to Duluth, Minnesota. Or I think Thunder Bay might be the furthest, or like, I don't know where the furthest area is. But it's kind of, so they built the Welland Canal, which then essentially like created a way for ships to come through to the Great Lakes, and then ships to be able to offset their weight. So if a ship is empty, it like scoops up all the water into the belly of the ship. Like it like scoops it up. And that's called ballast water. And if you pick up ballast water from the over in the Black Sea or like that Mediterranean, if you pick up ballast water from China or India or something like that, you're picking up all of the organisms that live in that area. You scoop it up, and then you make your way across the world, and you go down the St. Lawrence Seaway and through the Welland Canal. And then when you get to your destination, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, Lake Superior, you dump out all of that ballast water to take on the weight of the cargo that you're going to be moving. And so what was happening was they were just like bringing all of these creatures into the Great Lakes that had never existed on the Great Lakes. They were like this total shock to the Great Lakes system. And there's kind of like, if this is a story of the Great Lakes, then there's three main characters, right? That get the top billing of like most interesting invasive species. The sea lamprey, which is like the most disgusting animal on the planet. It's so gnarly looking. Then the alewives, which is a type of prey fish. It didn't have any natural predators in the Great Lakes, so it exploded in population. And then finally the mussels. So the lamprey were kind of the first. They came in and they, what they do, Sam, they latch on to the side of lake trout, and they just suck out their insides. It's kind of this gnarly process. And to defeat those, so we were always like fighting back, right? So scientists, and when they start to realize that this is a major problem, they start to like figure out things that they can do to fight back on these invasive species. One way is that now ballast water has to be dumped out in the middle of the ocean and kind of flushed out of the boat system. So when a boat leaves the Mediterranean or the Black Sea, they make their way to the middle of the ocean, they dump their water, and then like scoop up salt water, because salt water is going to be less likely to house like creatures that could easily survive in freshwater environments. Not that that's entirely, but somewhat. And so you have the alewives, and the alewives are in the 1960s. Next, you have the alewives, right? So I forgot. Let me back up for 2 seconds. The lamprey, we created something super fancy called lampricide. Sounds good, doesn't it? And we dumped it in all of the waterways around the Great Lakes to kill off the lampreys young. So we killed all the lampreys, but then we were like, yeah, we're doing great. Like, we're defeated all of the Great Lakes invasive species. And then the alewives come. And alewives, like I said, don't have a natural predator. And so they're just like piling up. They overpopulate, and they end up just piling up on Great Lakes beaches. It's so hard to believe too, because now Great Lakes beaches are like a tourist destination. Like, everybody loves like the Lake Michigan coast and Lake Superior and all this stuff. Well, Lake Superior wasn't as negatively impacted as Lake Michigan. But imagine going to those beaches today and having them just be piled with billions of dead alewives, dead fish. They were being bulldozed off of the beaches. That's how many there were. And so what's our solution for this? We're so smart. We always come up with a solution. Sam, you go ahead and guess. What do you think we did? What did we do to defeat this prey fish that was taking over the Great Lakes?
Are we going back to the asides again, where we're trying to attack their reproductive organs, or no?
No, don't worry. That does come back into the picture. Instead, we decided to bring in their natural predator. So who did we introduce into the Great Lakes? This is something that a lot of people don't realize. But all of this salmon in the Great Lakes, we actually introduced salmon to the Great Lakes as the natural predators to the alewives. So it's just like really interesting piece of history, because what happened was they were able to do this because they convinced tourism, or like they convinced whoever, the powers that be, that this would be good for Great Lakes tourism. sport fishing was like a huge thing. And the Great Lakes at this point were not where you go and like lounge on the beach. So everybody's like sport fishing. You know what
Yeah.
we need? We need salmon. And so what they did was that the plan was that salmon, of course, salmon aren't going to naturally reproduce themselves, because salmon have like this really deep instinct to go back up to the waterways, up into the rivers that they came from.
Yeah.
So when they planted salmon into the Great Lakes, they actually believed that they weren't going to naturally reproduce themselves. So the idea was that they were just going to continually dump fry, which are the little baby salmon, into the Great Lakes every year. Hundreds of thousands of fry dumped into the Great Lakes, salmon fry. I guess you know what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
So of course the alewife population plummets because the salmon are eating them. Good, great, perfect. Salmon population is hot stuff, doing good. Then of course the salmon start to reproduce in nature, like against what they're like, of course, because nature always finds a way.
Right.
And then of course the salmon population booms and then crashes. So you have this interesting, like, the alewife boom, then the salmon boom, and then the crash, and then the crash. And it's kind of this funny like soap opera of like what's happening with the invasive species. And this kind of left room for the mussels that we know today to take over the Great Lakes. The mussels were much more insidious, way less fun than the the alewives and the lamprey. The mussels are really awful. It started with the zebra mussel and then led to the quagga mussel. What's the difference between the two? Sam, are you ready? What's the difference between a quagga mussel and a zebra mussel? They look the same. The only difference is that zebra have more defined lines, and the quaggas also have stripes. Okay. So a lot of times you're seeing quagga mussels. You're not seeing zebra mussels nowadays. Okay. You're most likely seeing they attach to hard surfaces, rock, piers, pipes, all those goodies, which is why they're destroying a lot of lakes around the United States. But quagga mussels are special because they can attach to sand. They don't even need anything really to attach to. And so what's the bottom of Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, they're all sand. And so of course you have this boom of quagga mussels. So quagga mussels kind of are like our current battle, and they're coming up with a mussel side, just like what they came up with the lampricide, to try to fight the mussels. So they have a more universal problem because they're affecting, like, Texas is like overrun with them. All of the West Coast is overrun. Like, these mussels are like the worst thing for all lakes, not just the Great Lakes.
Yeah, that's interesting. And these asides, anything I hear that I just cringe, because I'm just thinking of like, okay, we might think that it's only going to affect like these mussels, but like, what if it's also affecting, like, long-term affecting like other reproductive organs of other organisms that we just don't know about quite yet? So it's it's a touchy subject, but I mean, something that has to be addressed, or there's some adverse effects coming down the pipe. No, I didn't even know about alewives. That's really cool. I didn't know about that, and I didn't know. This is another thing I didn't know. I didn't know that salmon wasn't indigenous to the Great Lakes. Mm-hmm. That's freaking cool. That's a cool story.
And I didn't know that story, I gave you the most brief summary, but that story is fascinating. It's such a fascinating, because it's like one man that thought of it. He was like a Great Lakes, or he was maybe at Michigan State. I forget what his name was, but he's like this famous guy who kind of came up with the plan to plant salmon in the Great Lakes. And now we still have salmon today, and they're still planted in the Great Lakes to this day, because we're constantly trying to feed this sport fish tourist industry, which is being kind of decimated by the fact that the food chain's all screwed up now, because the mussels like clean the water so thoroughly that there's no nutrients like left for all of the little guys that provide the bottom of this pyramid. It's kind of interesting though. Can I tell you one other crazy thing that this is one of my favorite facts about Great Lakes, like ecology and invasive species. So we got all these mussels, right? It's bad news. You've got all this. So there's one native fish called the whitefish, and the whitefish is struggling. Like it can't get its normal food source because the mussels are completely wiping it out. So the whitefish decides, you know what? I'm just going to start eating these mussels. They look pretty good. I'm going to start eating them. So these whitefish start chomping down on mussels, and this is such an interesting story of genetic mutation, because what happens when they start to eat, digest, and then poop out the mussels? The mussels are sharp and they're really like pointy, and they start to rip up the whitefish butthole. So the whitefish butthole is like destroyed by these mussels. But it's like I'm going to overcome this. So the whitefish keep eating the mussels, and they keep getting their butthole destroyed every single time that they try to poop. And so over the course of a very short amount of time, just a few generations of whitefish, suddenly you have an evolved whitefish butthole, which is like prepared to deal with the stress of eating the mussels that are taking over the Great Lakes. So that's like a story of like, of how nature overcomes these types of ecological, speed bumps along the way.
I love the environmental pressures pushing genetic mutation. That's so fantastic. Honestly, somebody needs to be studying this for human sphincters whenever we have trouble. Somebody get on that.
We got to start being able to eat those mussels too. That'd be a good way to fight the population problem.
Yeah, I don't know if I would do it. I like eating mussels. I mean, that are usually about this big. I don't know if I'd want to eat the little one all whole.
Yeah, it would be a very crunchy experience. It's like what they're doing for the Asian carp. I think Asian carp, they're trying to figure out a way for us to eat them to try to fight that population. So, anyway.
So true. So the last thing I think we should cover, and then we can go into a commercial break, is we talked about the invasive species, but there's also a lot of history just within the last couple hundred years in terms of pollution, maybe more recently than maybe in the past. And maybe we're seeing more repercussions now based on the timeline of what we've done as humans. I know two things that come to my mind, and I'm sure there's a lot more that you know about. Obviously, one being plastic pollution, the other one being actual like algae blooms, like cyanobacteria, stuff like that. That's what would you like to tackle first?
Oh yeah. Oh, I did a great video. I think algae blooms are so interesting. Like dead zones are really interesting. They're really awful, but they're also fascinating. I did a great video recently on the Great Black Swamp. Do you know about the Great Black Swamp, Sam?
No.
So the Great Black Swamp is actually on your home turf. It's on the west coast of Lake Erie.
Okay.
Below Detroit and, to the west of Cleveland and Toledo, like near Toledo.
Okay.
Like that's kind of where.
Toledo.
So originally, like all the way back until like, when we were actively colonizing the United States, there was this monster area that was just muck and sludge right in that area. Nobody even wanted to traverse it. In fact, the war, and I'm going to get something wrong on this because it's been a minute since I thought about it, but there's a war between Michigan and Ohio. It's like the Great Michigan and Ohio War.
Really?
Yeah, get this. They never come into contact because they can't get past the Great Black Swamp. So the two sides never actually came into battle because they can't make it through this monster swamp. Why am I bringing this up? Because the swamp is now one of the most fertile farming lands in the United States, right? And so what happened is they drained the swamp. And then those drainage channels, and just in general, all of the farming phosphorus, all of the
nitrogen,
all the stuff that they,
sure.
all the stuff they pump onto their fields drains into Lake Erie, and Lake Erie is the most shallow. It's the warmest, and it gets the most negatively affected by these algae blooms, which is why you get these beautiful satellite images of like these monster neon green algae blooms that are deadly, like the blue-green algae and the I think you call it cyanobacteria, and botulism are like rampant in these types of algae blooms. There's also a huge issue with salt. Road salts are actually impacting tons of lakes. Like there's lakes. This is one of the biggest problems, especially for like if you got a lake in your backyard, you live in a cute little community, that surrounds a lake, like not only are you probably struggling with phosphorus because people like to mow their lawns right next to the lake,
Mm-hmm.
but also road salts get dumped right into our waterways and
Mm.
into our rivers. And so salt is also this huge, is like basically changing the salinity of the Great Lakes. And then of course I know most about the plastic pollution because part of my artist practice is going to Great Lakes beaches and collecting. Well, I am now of the mindset I love plastic. It's like at first I was kind of just grossed out by it, right? Like as you do, you're hanging out by the beach, you're like, man, it's so dirty, it's so gross. Now I'm like, oh my God, if I could find just another Barbie shoe, like a pink Barbie, I love it. I get so excited. A Lego, oh my gosh, please. Lego gets me so hyped. Like I just love finding any type of plastic. What did I find recently? I was at the beach. I found a tiny deflated Barbie doll arm. So like, oh, so great. It was like a little doll arm. And I found one of those little monkeys that like latches on to the other monkeys, like a little
Oh yeah,
monkey arms. So
monkey in a barrel.
I collect all plastic. I collect everything, like even the gross stuff, even the stuff that's just like little minuscule bits. Obviously, microplastics are like a huge issue. It's like as the plastic breaks down further and further and further, you can't even see it anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And I collect all that stuff because I'm an equal opportunity collector. I collect all. You can't see it from there, but in the corner of my studio over here, I just have boxes and boxes and boxes of trash. So
Hey, one man's trash is another man's treasure. With quotes, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's good that like you're actually picking that stuff up too. Like I love to see people at the beach actually picking that stuff up rather than actually, and you can even make a series about this with like beach glass, especially in Lake Erie. There's beach glass everywhere. You've heard of that, right? The beach
No,
glass.
I've collected it. I did a Great Lakes tour to all of the Great Lakes where I traveled, and it was kind of a fun thing. So it was in the middle of the pandemic, so it was kind of not like there wasn't really a lot to do safely. So this is like a great safe activity: is go collect shit from the beach. And Lake Erie has the best beach glass.
Yeah.
And there's a couple different really interesting types of beach glass. So like I collect beach glass. Like I said, I have equal opportunity. I collect anything and everything. But there's Pirate's glass, which appears like black, but then you shine a light to it and it shows red or green under a light. So that's kind of a fun one, Pirate's glass. And then there's uranium glass, which is radioactive, which is common on Lake Erie's beaches. So if you take a black light to the beach, you can actually find uranium glass.
I'm gonna try that. I am.
Yeah, there's all sorts of fun things on Great Lakes beaches. You've got Petoskey stones. You know what Petoskey stones, Sam?
What's that?
Oh, you would like them because of the whole like Laurentia and Silurian Sea. Everybody here from Michigan is laughing right now because everybody in Michigan knows what a Petoskey stone is because it's like the state stone. Everybody's obsessed with them. It's a type of coral that's been fossilized, and you can find them on northern Michigan and northern Lake Huron. And it's like this beautiful stone. Same with like the Charlevoix stones. Then you have the euperlites, which are a type of sodalite. There's like so many amazing things to find on Great Lakes beaches.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Just to bring, I guess, a little bit of awareness. Those the plastic that you're talking about. I think a lot of that happens, and I've definitely read a few papers and I've watched a few documentaries about. It's more of an upstream issue where you're seeing like if you're on the beach and you're seeing those like what are those called nurdles, the little
Mm-hmm.
spherical plastic bits. The real issue with that isn't only just like that it's the physical plastic, the fact that it will break down over time and create microplastics. It's also the additives that's on top of those. And
Yeah.
The studies are showing that those additives like PFAs, BPA, etc., stuff like that, phthalates, those are all endocrine system attacking agents. And the more that we study on that, the more that it looks scary.
The forever chemicals, right?
Yeah, the forever chemicals. Yeah. I mean, the best thing, I guess, to really say to people is like, it sounds scary, but the best thing that you can do, and I think how we can combat that is just having better government regulation. Because right now there's like no government regulation at the moment, at least.
No, yeah, especially for things like nurdles. Like I think nurdles are some of the worst because
Yeah.
they just escape. They're like the master escape artists of plastic because it's not like you're getting like plastic leftover by people. This is a remnant of like the top of the food chain is the industry is dumping these by accident most of the time, but then sometimes it's just like, wow, why did that accident ever happen in the first place? It really shouldn't have. So
it's kind of like a physical oil spill, just it's literally oil or petrol product that's solid, and it's being dumped out into the lakes or into any bodies that end up into the lakes.
The word nurdle is so fun. And let me just say, the reason I think nurdles are kind of interesting, one last thing, is that they're really fun to collect. Because for I'm sure that some physicists could explain this to me. I need someone to explain this to me. I know I have a science channel, but I have never figured this out. I, in theory, know what it is. But nurdles are fun because they come to the surface of the sand, right? So not all plastic has the power to do that. But nurdles, I think they're lighter than the sand. And that like general wind plus like vibration brings them to the surface. So you're walking along the beach. It's not like you have to dig for them. They're right there on the surface. And they're kind of freaky because they're perfect circles. They're everywhere. I've been to every Great Lakes beach. That's a lie. No, I've been to every Great Lake, and I've been to many of the beaches. Even Lake Superior, I was shocked at how many nurdles I found on Lake Superior's beaches. You'd think that Lake Superior would be immune to this, but in fact, it's like a very common problem. So next time you go to the beach, look on the very surface. It just like sits on the surface of the sand, and you wouldn't expect it.
Yeah, it's based on surface tension, and obviously it's
surface tension.
Yeah,
and specific gravity, of course.
yeah. So you asked the physics question.
No, I'm ready. I should do it. I wish I could do a video on it. Just wow, this is amazing. Like I love that this guy comes to the surface.
Yeah, definitely, because sand is very rough. Its crystalline structure is very rough. So if you have something that's smooth, it's going to definitely want to escape out of that roughness, especially based on its relative density, for sure.
I'm writing this down. Surface tension
and relative density.
I love it. Okay, cool. Thank you, Sam. I knew I came here for a reason. Now we're good to go. We're done. I got everything I needed. I get to go now.
Sick. Speaking of being done now, we're gonna end this first segment, and then when we come back, we're gonna talk more about communicating science with Geo and talking a little bit more about what she does. So stick around.
I actually don't think I'm doing a very good TikTok voice right now that I think about it. But on TikTok, when I first started TikTok, I got like a lot of negative comments about my voice. Did I tell you that?
No.
Oh my gosh. Because I was kind of just like this, where I would just like talk like this and like my normal voice. So sorry to my whole audience out there who just came on and was like excited about my soothing, amazing voice. Everybody's like always like, you need to be on podcast, Geo. And I'm like, you don't want me on a podcast. I'm secretly unhinged and I have a very normal voice. But on TikToks, I actually consciously like smooth my voice out and kind of not lower it exactly, but just make it really like even. So like my voice on TikTok is more like this. It's kind of even. It's not super. And now I get no complaints about my voice, and like everybody loves it and everybody talks about it all the time. And it's like something that everybody loves, but I actually changed it for TikTok because of how much hate I was getting initially.
That's wild. And since we're talking about science communication, I'm not even going to do a 3, 2, 1. We're into it. This is segment 2. This is all just going to be about science communication and talking about how this ties into Geo's work. But what's that one lady's name? Alexandra?
Alexandra! We're besties. Well, we're not besties, but I do love her.
I love her too. I love her content. She's amazing. She makes great videos. Whenever I saw like that one video that she posted about all the hate comments that she got, plus like how she had to change her name to Alex just to get interviews, sickening. That was sickening.
Well, and she definitely gets the brunt of it too. Like I don't actually experience that as badly as she does. I think there's a few factors that I think make her a easier target in a lot of ways for sexism and just like very cruel and mean comments. She definitely puts her whole face and everything into the videos, and I think that does it. I think as a woman, you just gotta like stick your whole self out there, and then you're gonna invite criticism immediately just because you're a woman. And she's kind of very like, she's front and center, and she also like has amazing, beautiful hair, and like there's so many things. She's just a beautiful person, and I think that it's easy for them to be like, wow, you know, automatically just jump down her throat because she's a woman. I don't get that, because all I am on TikTok is a forehead. So I don't have to deal with that. And like, I also do, like I was saying before, I manipulate my voice. So I try to avoid vocal fry, which is a sexism thing. Like a lot of women who utilize vocal fry, which is kind of, if you want ever an example, all you have to do is go watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians. It's something that women emulate in male voices, because male voices are, obviously it's a patriarchy, male voices are more predominant in society, and therefore women who are utilizing vocal fry are trying to kind of emulate those power moves. So vocal fry is that gurgling sound. I don't know if I can force it.
Yeah, like a low
Gurgling.
octave kind of a, yeah.
I'd say like 95% of my comments are 90, like really nice, except for on Instagram.
Oh,
Instagram
really?
is scary. Oh yeah,
Really?
Instagram is so terrifying. I'm terrified of my Instagram comment section. I don't even want to look at it. It gives me so much stress. TikTok's fine though. I love TikTok. It's because people can write an entire dissertation on Instagram. They can write the longest comment in the entire world, and I'm just like, I'm sitting back like, okay, so that comment you just wrote is longer than the script for my entire video. Like. like I'm sorry, I summarized it. I'm sorry if I used the wrong word to describe something, which I'm always like, now I'm always afraid of, like, so, but I do deal with like climate change denial as like, it's like a constant, especially if my videos mention any type of like geological history. Like I did one recently on the Chesapeake Bay. You would find this one interesting. I don't know if you saw my Chesapeake Bay video. It was a banger. It was about the asteroid that hit the Chesapeake Bay. And well, it didn't hit the Chesapeake Bay. It like was not the Chesapeake Bay at the time, but it was it hit off the coast of what is now United States, or but it hit off the coast, and then as the land changed, the river valley that became the Chesapeake Bay was the flooded river valley, was kind of because the land there was established, the bedrock was established by this asteroid impact. That video, oh my God, crazy comments. Oh my gosh, I don't touch them. I like don't, 95% of the time, I just don't bother. I just leave them alone. There's only occasionally where I'll engage with it, because you end up just in a useless battle in a comment section where everything's taken out of context, and it's not worth it.
Yeah, I agree. Have you seen Science is Real on TikTok? I love that.
Yeah,
guy.
he's a cool guy. Yeah,
he's a G. He puts up with a lot of stuff in his comment section, because he talks about evolutionary biology, and we ain't going there, but those people were ruthless. I've done a couple videos where I've gotten some ruthless comments. I'm like, man, I'm reading Google Scholar papers. Like I don't know where you're getting your facts from, but this is just where I'm pulling it from. And honestly, what I do anymore is I take the article and I paste it. I paste the link right into right as a reply, because I just go read it. I don't want to summarize anymore. Like it's
That's true. And it is difficult, especially when people get into nitty gritty stuff. It can be really hard. And Science is Real, the guy on TikTok, he's great about, like, he really engages with people in the comment section.
He does.
I kind of just go like I'm not here to fight with people, and if I'm ever really wrong about something, like I really feel like I made a mistake, I just take the video down. I don't just leave it up. I think there's so many of those. The one problem with TikTok, just on the topic of content creation and like TikTok in general, is this idea that like there's this massive amount of misinformation out there. And a lot of that misinformation comes from people that just don't take their video down when it's clearly wrong. I can think of so many examples of this where people just blow things out of proportion and go into topics that are just not, like the guy who made a video about the sharks in a volcano. He's like, there's sharks living in a volcano. And it's just like,
what?
The volcano is like deep under the ocean, and the sharks are just around the volcano that is underwater. It's like not, So like there's manipulation of the way that you say stuff and the way that you share information. So I just like that can be very frustrating because the other thing is like, is TikTok secretly just destroying the entire society? Possibly, could be. I think I have ethical dilemmas with TikTok that are, and just like the way that we're consuming information is kind of
It's very
sometimes
short.
I go into deep like being like, wow, I'm just part of that whole system. I'm just like a cog in a giant.
In one instance, it's really cool because we get to share in a layman's aspect interesting information. There's no more like a lot of gatekeeping is going away. So we can provide this information to everybody. But I can also see the other end of the spectrum where, it is kind of pulling down our attention spans and making us, uh, more demanding. Like you know how it is. Like it's very satisfactory to be on TikTok. Your serotonin's through the freaking roof, like for an hour, and you can just get into a trance, which is not ideal. It's something so wildly new as a concept to human beings that it's very dangerous for sure. But I like both ends of the spectrum.
No, I do too. I just think it's an interesting topic, like especially if you're somebody who's contributing to it. I think just at least being conscious of it, knowing that you're like part of this larger, evolving situation, which is the situation of our attention or whatever you want to call it. And I do think that it's hard to. I feel like it's gnawing away. I think something that I haven't heard people talk about this, but I've thought about it a lot. So sorry to be off topic. But just like the way that it kind of gnaws away at our empathy as well, just because you go from a goofy, funny video that you're laughing at to like a tragic, terrible, like something happening in someone's life or something happening to somebody's pet and you start crying and then you flick to the next video and you're laughing again. It's like giving us whiplash for our emotions. And I'm just like, what is that doing? Like, what is that? Like, it's like the news was already gnawing away at our ability to have empathy or to like feel things. I feel like anytime there's like big news, I just don't feel anything anymore. I just kind of am numb. And I kind of wonder how TikTok's also playing into that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I just lay in bed at night and stare at the ceiling and think, what am I doing?
That's fair.
So
I guess maybe to get on course in terms of what we wanted to address, I know
the actual topics of the video.
I know we took a big spin off. I mean, that's cool because maybe not a lot of people are really familiar with like the creator end of TikTok, especially somebody who creates, said science information has to deal with a lot of criticism and stuff, and even just based on like who we are and what we look like too with Astro Alexandra. It's crazy. But I guess more on topic, I'm kind of curious why you envelop science the way you do into your work.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of interesting. My mother is, I think I mentioned this briefly before, but my mother, Sandra Rutherford, she was a earth science elementary or middle school teacher. She taught earth science. And then she went on to teach earth science education at the college level. So she actually taught at Eastern Michigan University. And so my whole life has been like very much integrated into science, even though I did not major in science. I took science classes. I loved my geography class in college, loved it. Loved my earth science classes. I've never been as drawn to like chemistry, biology, or physics, which I think kind of dominates your high school experience, which is where I started to kind of drift away from science because I really didn't like that part of it. And so my work has always been science adjacent. All of my art has been. I always have made artwork about climate change. From the very earliest like paintings in high school, I won first place in a painting contest for this really, oh my God, you would laugh if you saw this painting. It's like the most cheesy painting in the entire world. It's like this earth melting and there's like a tree burning and this industry of like this green smog like coming up from the bottom. It's like all of the cheesy like descriptions of climate change. I kind of put those all together into a painting and I was like, wow, I won first place. I thought I was such a badass at the time. But ever since then, I've always included climate change. So when I started doing work about the Great Lakes, I wasn't really going to be doing like, atmospheric or like aesthetic pieces of Great Lakes, landscapes or ecology, but I wanted to bring attention to all of the issues. So science is tied right in alongside with the work that I'm doing, where I make work that is about climate change, whether that's invasive species or pollution or the erosion and the changing waters that are in the Great Lakes. So it's always been important.
I love that. So just say a kind of similar topic. I know a lot of people are fascinated or just like want to stay with the STEM acronym. Do you love the STEAM acronym? How do you feel about art being embedded with science, technology, engineering, and math? Because I
Yeah.
my own take's probably pretty similar to yours.
Yeah, I think it's important to have art in there because I think a lot of those things are inherently creative, even though you wouldn't necessarily, your first thought with technology or engineering or technology is not necessarily creative or art, but I think they're hand in hand, and I think it's important. I think it was, I think there's a part of my brain that like still says I gotta say STEM first because it came first,
Hmm.
and it kind of, but I definitely took STEAM was just starting to gain traction. I was laughing at there was no pun there, but I thought there was going to be a pun, but it didn't happen. About like a steam, it like started to gain energy, whatever. When I was teaching, so my first degree was actually an education degree. So I taught high school art for 5 years at the wonderful Chelsea High School in Michigan. And I was always conscious of how to create integration because my mom's a science teacher. She'd be like, "Well, how are you bringing science into your classroom?" And so a lot of the like lesson plans that I would form would be integrative lesson plans where it's like, how can we bring science, technology, and even engineering to a certain extent into my classroom as an art teacher. So as an art teacher, being conscious of that so that it can go both ways, so that other classrooms can kind of start to utilize art in their spaces as well to promote problem solving, creative thinking. All of those things I think sometimes go to the wayside in education that is focused on multiple choice and short answer and like
Yeah.
these functions that are just are they're all the same. It's like, when are people having to actually hands-on solve problems? And I think that's where STEAM comes in.
Yeah, I agree. And even just adding on to that, like the communication aspect of that, because art is a form of communication. Like you can have a great mathematical theorem, but maybe you need to create some sort of, you need to communicate that like in some way. So it would be, some sort of algorithm or, output like a code that kind of shows the way that, your theorem is expressed. That way people can visually see it. You can also communicate that verbally, like art is, it just comes in all forms of communication. Whenever we image something with, say, the JWST, that stuff has to be colorized based on the spectrum from like the infrared portion, and that's put into, a visual light spectrum such that we can see it, and that's a form of communication through art, right? Because without that transformation, we wouldn't be able to the layman wouldn't be able to understand that information. So art is in base, and I like the fact that we don't just keep it as STEM and it's as STEAM now, because it's actually just giving more recognition to art and how important it is in science, technology, engineering, and math. Because without it, we wouldn't ever be able to communicate our ideas. And I think with the more, like you talked about earlier, with the misinformation aspect, is we need to train our people in STEAM to be able to take advantage of art to communicate their ideas so there is less misinformation. And that's not a now, that's like we're trying to solve that now, but like it's definitely a generational thing. We need to be, more art conscious such that there's less, maybe less misinformation down the road. That's my spiel on STEAM. That's
No,
why I like it.
definitely. I love that. I think that's 100% true. And I think that we should not forego art in the way that we communicate. And I think that a lot of my work, something that, the art world might scoff at some of my work. It would be easy for a art person to kind of see through what I'm trying to do with some of it. So I try to make my work for not only art people, but also the layman, also the person who's never had an art degree, somebody who, who
Didn't know what a
has,
book art was.
yeah, which is fine because I don't think I knew what that was 6 years ago, so it's not a big deal. But I do find that, like, if I want you, Sam, to be able to walk into my show, into my gallery with my work, and I want you to be able to know what it's about. I don't want you to walk out confused or frustrated. I want you to be like, wow, I feel like I learned something through the communication of this work. And that's important to me. And that's something that was important about, like, tons of people were able to come to my show, which was so cool, come and see the work that I put together for the Great Lakes. And a lot of that was essentially a part of it is communication. But another aspect of my work that's been so important is my videos that I make about my work.
Yeah.
In some ways, those videos are more powerful than the work itself, which is interesting. And maybe the upper echelons of the art world would disagree, but I think that my ability to, like, I've at least 10 million views on all of my videos for my art combined, like something like that, because I've had a few of them go really pretty viral. I'm very proud of those ones because it was definitely took a lot of effort to, like, put together a video that told the story of the Great Lakes, of pollution, of invasive species, of what's going on with botulism or whatnot through the lens of the work that I'm creating. And that video will always reach more people than the art ever will. The art will only reach a certain audience, a limited audience.
I agree.
Just in my current status of not super famous, just like average Joe making artwork. And so that's what's kind of interesting, is the communication aspect.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You're going to be able to reach so many different people. I mean, just based on where you are, not everybody's going to come to Michigan to just, to look at your art, but they can definitely see it in Indonesia or anywhere in Europe. As long as they got TikTok, they can see and connect with that. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. I don't know how people would really argue against that unless they're really just all about monetizing their art.
I think it's more like the art world can be a little bit cut off. Like, the art world can take things personally. The art world is into gatekeeping, I think, a little bit. So anyway, it doesn't matter. That's a whole art world conversation we don't have to dig into, but it is a fascinating one. So
yeah, definitely. And I think you get that literally in every every portion of the acronym of STEAM. But I think we're going to run into our last commercial break. And then whenever we come back, we're going to be talking about something really interesting. A lot of people love this about Geo, and that is Spooky Lake Month. So stick around. All right, we're back. This is the last segment, and I already prefaced it. We're going to be talking about Spooky Lake Month. And if you're confused, I totally get it. That's why we're going to start this segment out, because I've never really heard of that term until I came across your work on TikTok, and it is so fascinating, so viral. The videos are fantastic. So I guess before I spoil anything, I'm just going to leave it to Geo. Geo, what is Spooky Lake Month?
I love it. I love answering this question because it is a little bit of a misnomer. If you're not familiar with Spooky Lake Month, it might imply that there is somehow content that is supernatural or ghost related, but actually Spooky Lake Month is about history, it's about science, and it's about environmental disaster. And that's my favorite one, but people don't like that one as much because it's a little depressing. But I love environmental disasters, which I think are really spooky. So Spooky Lake started with actually a lake called Candy Lake in Kazakhstan. And it is a lake that was formed after a landslide. And the lake is bright blue because of glacial flower. So it's like this super turquoise blue. And all these trees are sticking out of it. And beneath the water, so the trees are bleached, like kind of these pokey stumps out of the water. And then beneath the water, they're full trees under the water, and people have like dived there to go and see the trees. So the trees exist because because it was an abrupt lake. It came out of nowhere after this landslide. So that's actually what started Spooky Lakes. I saw pictures of that, and I thought, wow, that's just kind of spooky. Look at that. It's kind of creepy looking. Like, what's going on there? And of course, I've gotten a little lucky with TikTok, where like anything I post that's like kind of a fun idea, it always seems to go pretty well. So like from my very first video getting 1.5 million views, and then my very first science video getting 4.5 million views, it's just kind of like a funny, like I kind of do it by accident. And Spooky Lakes was the same thing. It got a couple million views, and it kind of, the first year was, I kind of feel bad because the first year I didn't really know what I was doing. I was kind of new to the app, and we talked about some fantastic Spooky Lake topics. So some are examples of Spooky Lakes? Lake Nicaragua in, shocker, Nicaragua, is one of the only lakes in the world that has bull sharks in it.
Oh,
right. And they for years and years and years, it was a mystery of like, how did these bull sharks get to this freshwater lake in the center of Central America, right? Like in the middle of this of this country. And it ended up being a river system that comes in, and the bull sharks just go all the way up the river into the lake, and then they become part of like the lake population. Another example, Lake Maracaibo, just south of Lake Nicaragua, is a enormous lake that has lightning. There's this well, it's kind of explained, but it's still somewhat of a geological phenomenon where lightning, just like, there's more lightning strikes in Lake Maracaibo than anywhere else in the world. It's like this very strange, eerie, like you go there and there's just lightning all night. It's crazy.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's lakes all over the world that are strange, and the science is weird, or the history is strange, or like something has happened at this lake, like shipwrecks are an example of a spooky lake topic. Environmental disasters, like anywhere where they've mined is always spooky. Like if they've created an open pit mine and it's flooded, automatically somewhat spooky, because it's usually full of heavy chemicals, and it's usually like orange or bright blue or like whatever. It's like all these crazy colors.
Right.
So Spooky Lakes is kind of a fun topic because it's like, how can the world around us either begin as something strange and unusual, or become strange and unusual because of human history. So that's what Spooky Lake is.
That's a fantastic way to like get people interested in the science that you want to communicate, right? Making it a story, making it extremely interesting like that, and just literally even calling it Spooky Lake. It's just like, whoa, what? Everybody wants to know about something spooky, which is pretty cool. So
and that kind of opened up into haunted hydrology too, because obviously my first year I kind of used up all of the lakes, right? Yeah. And so now I joke that like anything wet goes. Like, there's like any water at all, then it could be considered for Spooky Lake Month, because now it's like, you kind of run out of spooky lakes, right? Without like all the best spooky lakes I used my first year, like Skeleton Lake in Nepal, or it's technically in India. It's like on the border of India and Nepal, where there's like skeletons from all these different time periods and all these different heritages. So like we have skeletons from Europe and skeletons from India, all in this one lake in the middle of the Himalayan mountains, and nobody knows how they got there. It's kind of like the ultimate spooky lake. Like that one's so freaky. Bog bodies are pretty spooky, right? Like where the human body can be preserved because of the lack of bacteria and in peat. Like this anaerobic environment can essentially preserve the human body, and they become like leather-like. I felt like a lot of people had heard of bog bodies, but I was surprised by how many people have never heard of them.
It's almost like petrification of like wood. It's in that manner of like the minerals then just kind of take over rather than having an anaerobic or aerobic decomposition.
Which actually applies to one of my spooky lake topics, which is the Black Sea, Black Sea is a very strange body of water, and that's because it is a sea because of the Bosphorus Strait, which is a big connection to the Mediterranean Sea, which is obviously connected to the ocean. And so the Black Sea, all of that salt water coming in through the Bosphorus Strait goes to the bottom of the Black Sea.
Right.
And the top is a lot of fresh water. And there's kind of there's not that much mixing. There actually it's a get this, it's a meromictic environment, which means that, or it's a meromictic not lake, it's a sea, that doesn't mix very often. So you don't get the salt water and the fresh water mixing together. So then you have this entire bottom half of the Black Sea that's an anaerobic environment. There's not a lot of bacteria, there's not a lot of life. And that's why the oldest shipwrecks in the world are preserved at the bottom of the Black Sea.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Versus the Mediterranean that doesn't have, that's a fun one. So that qualifies as a spooky lake. I've even done lakes on other planets, like Titan, which is one of the, it's not a planet, it's a moon, but it has lakes made of mercury. It's like fascinating. Like it rains mercury and on Titan. And so all of these kind of qualify as something that's strange and unusual, but it's entirely part of, like, it's real. It's like, this is nonfiction, baby. It like doesn't, we don't like get into any of that. Like sometimes people ask me about like haunted lakes. And the problem with haunted lakes is that a lot of haunted lakes are actually like indigenous stories that have been like manipulated and taken out of context, or places that like kind of the stories have gotten out of the, like kind of run wild. Like Lake Lanier is probably the most famous haunted lake in America, in Georgia. It's like a lot of people have died there, and it's a flooded reservoir that kind of displaced a lot of people. And so I think that there's actually more interesting lakes that are spooky because the world is a spooky place, instead of lakes that are like inherently haunted or something like that. So
yeah, no, I love that. And just kind of, since we've been on that topic literally this whole time, do you have any spooky lake stories about the Great Lakes? Because why not? Do you have any for us?
Oh, I got so many. Of course, I have so many. I think I've done a spooky lake topic about almost all of the lakes. This year I did Lake Erie had an island that was dedicated to prisoners of war during the Civil War. And that was kind of an interesting island where it was like, it's right off of Sandusky, Ohio, and you can actually see it from Cedar Point. The island is visible, and on that island, like men died while they were being held captive during the Civil War. So it's kind of this interesting piece of history. Lake Superior always gets, I feel like I like do too many topics on Lake Superior. I can't help it. Also, all my followers know that I have a bad habit of always giving it a 10 out of 10 because it's just, in my opinion, it's just the spookiest lake, like no matter what. And so, like, of course, my favorite topic from last year was the Kamloops shipwreck. Have you heard of the Kamloops, Sam?
No. Please.
So, of course, the Edmund Fitzgerald is the most famous of all of Great Lakes shipwrecks. Do you know about the Edmund Fitzgerald?
Not really a shipwreck fanatic, so please.
That's okay. Well, most people are familiar with it solely because of the Gordon Lightfoot song, right?
Okay.
The Gordon Lightfoot created this like ballad about the shipwreck that went down in 1975 called the Edmund Fitzgerald. Okay. It's a super famous shipwreck. And it's famous because at the time, and even today, we don't really know why it went down. And there was like this beautiful kind of history alongside the Edmund Fitzgerald. It was like the largest freighter on the Great Lakes for a long time, when it first was kind of christened onto Lake Superior. But the Kamloops kind of ends up being a little bit more interesting in some ways. We can't visit the Edmund Fitzgerald, despite the fact that it's close to Whitefish Bay and it's kind of actually in a shallow location on Lake Michigan. We can't visit it because a lot of the Great Lakes shipwrecks where men have died, their bodies are never retrieved. Right? So we leave them in the ship that they died in, and that becomes their graveyard. That becomes the cemetery for their remains. And so the Edmund Fitzgerald, especially alongside its like super fame because it was so famous, it became like you couldn't visit it. So divers can't go and visit the Edmund Fitzgerald. So despite the fact that the last times they did visit it, the human remains were identified, like seen on the shipwreck site, we have never visited it. Versus the Kamloops, which is a shipwreck off the coast of the Isle Royale, which is the largest island in Lake Superior. It's a national park. And I've done at least 3 or 4 topics on Isle Royale. Like that's how, like Isle Royale, I think is just haunted. Like if it's not because of the shipwrecks surrounding the island, it's because of the cannibalism. If it's not because of the cannibalism, it's because of the copper mining. If it's not because of the copper mining, it's because of the black flies, for sure. Haunted because of the black flies. So with the Kamloops shipwreck, it is this, it's one of many shipwrecks that went down during a storm on the Great Lakes, and they didn't know where the shipwreck was for a long time, but one of the sailors is still an active presence in the boiler room. And you know me, I'm not into supernatural. His actual physical body is still floating around the boiler room because of a phenomenon called adipocere. Adipocere, or corpse wax, in the bottom of deep, cold lakes. Any deep, cold lake, Lake Baikal, Great Slave Lake, any of these lakes could have dead bodies that have been preserved for up to 400 years. Oh, wow. And they become something like a soap. I always think it's like a soap person. I always imagine them as like literally just a little bar of soap, because the minerals in the water have a chemical reaction with the skin that creates a hard casing of soap, right? Which protects them from decomposition. So then they don't decompose. They just become this giant blob of soapy skin. And that chemical reaction is called adipocere. The result is corpse wax or graveyard wax, or whatever you want to call it. This can happen in a lot of different environments as well. It's just like at the bottom of cold lakes, but also in anaerobic environments. If a body gets wet in its grave and it's like in anaerobic soil, then it can't, like it will also become a soap body or corpse wax or one of these. So the famous body in the Kamloops shipwreck is called Old Whitey. It's this, soapy corpse wax. There's a video of it. It's very creepy. The video is like one of my favorite things ever. It's like this white blob that's just like floating around. And the divers, so that there's obviously like stories alongside this, because divers will go into the boiler room with the body, and it'll seem like he's following you around because the fins are kind of moving the water around in the boiler room, and then he like floats around and follows you.
That's amazing.
So yeah, that's why in Gordon Lightfoot's song he says like Superior never gives up her dead. And that's because of this. It's not most bodies in most lakes. Like if you were to die and drown in a lake in Texas, your body would bloat and float to the surface, but not in the Great Lakes, not in Lake Superior.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
Yeah. So there's been, get this, there are 10,000 shipwrecks in the Great Lakes, and 30,000 people have died in the Great Lakes in modern history.
Wow.
Yeah. So think about how many bodies are just in the water that you will never know about.
Tasty.
So yeah, the Great Lakes are a wonderful topic for Spooky Lakes, and I've covered them multiple times.
Yeah, I could imagine 30,000 fatalities. That's insane. Over just honestly, people think that's a long time. That's a really short time period.
Yeah, 300 years or so, like at the most. So, 300 years of, I'm thinking like modern, like since we've been recording it. Yeah, so the Great Lakes are a great topic, and Spooky Lakes is fun because it's kind of interesting because Spooky Lakes can be kind of unexpected. Like it's actually difficult to research Spooky Lakes because it's not like you can just Google weird lakes or like strange lakes, because there's so many things that could qualify for it that would never come up under a Google search, right? Like Lake Buenavista, which is a lake in Colombia, which is the actual location of El Dorado, the city of gold. So the city of gold has this like huge connotation, this history to it where it's an actual city and so on and so forth. But actually, the real El Dorado, the real city of gold, is at the bottom of a lake. It's Lake Guatavita, where they used to, the Muisca people used to travel to the surface of the lake once a year and perform well, I don't know, but not sacrifices, but they used to throw gold into the lake. And then when the Spaniards came and colonized, they tried to drain the lake to get to the gold, right? And people died trying to get this gold that would just be at the bottom of this muddy lake in Colombia. And so it's just really fascinating because the Spooky Lake umbrella is so broad that it can be difficult to like figure out what qualifies. And of course, like cave diving expeditions are kind of my like bread and butter. Like everybody loves a good cave diving expedition story. Just like there's so many different topics that fall under. This year I did the uranium mining in the Navajo Nation, which is a little bit, sometimes the only thing I don't love about Spooky Lakes is sometimes I can hit topics that are maybe kind of like, is it appropriate to give this a spooky rating? Because at the end of every video, I give a spooky rating. And sometimes I pick topics that I think are really haunting and terrifying, but they're also like so sad that it's like, is it appropriate to like rate this thing? So that's kind of something I'm aware of it. It's kind of a sad aspect of the videos, but uranium mining results in tailing ponds, which are radioactive. And there's all these giant tailing ponds that like cause problems for the water in the Navajo Nation. So,
jeez, yeah,
I'm rambling. I could literally talk about Spooky Lakes all day. I love talking about Spooky Lakes.
No, you're good. So I'm kind of curious. Have you looked into any? I know that I think it's Lake Michigan in like '96 or '97 that there was actually like a hurricane, like an actual hurricane. Did you do a video on that?
Yeah, last year.
Oh
no. Yep, I did a video on that last year. I also I've done a lot of videos on like all the deaths and like the Niagara Falls is like it's a great place to make videos about.
Of course.
But yeah, I did you're gonna test me here. 1913. I think that's the year of the Great Lakes hurricane, which was this enormous blizzard that on like satellite maps would have looked like a giant blizzard or a giant hurricane over Lake Michigan. Was it?
Oh. Yeah.
Now it's gonna bug me. But yes, I've done a video on that. It's a good one.
Oh, man, that's awesome. I mean, that's great for you because like you can kind of put out almost endless content. Like you can just keep going with anything that's hydrological, which is wonderful. That was a great move by you. Spooky Lakes to now it's like haunted hydrology, and now it's just keeps the playing field so wide open.
Yeah, no, people have fun with it. I think that it's also, I think people really, I've decided that something that's fun on TikTok is people like series. They like things where they like know what to expect and they get to. I also think it's nice when it's just it's a one time a year. People don't get tired of it. I think there's a few series I can think of on the top of my head I've seen on TikTok that people just get tired of them. They kind of get over it because they've seen too many times. And so I think it's kind of nice to take a break. I think it's nice to give something kind of this highlight once a year. And then they can go watch in November. They can watch Ig Nobel November. Do you follow Dexter?
No.
Oh my gosh, you got to check him out. His name is Dexter. I don't know what his @ is. I just know his name is Dexter. Yeah, he's a good one. Because then he does Ig Nobel November, which is like all of the strange Nobel Prize winners that are like not Nobel Prize winners, but the Ig Nobel Prize, which is a separate.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Honestly, what I do, I've been wanting to create a series, but I've been just like trying to be like that catch-all person. Like I really just enjoy, and maybe this is kind of like ADHD of me, but like I really like taking just a random topic and just making it. Like I'll do stuff on sharks, I'll do stuff on evolutionary biology, I'll do stuff on climate change, I'll do stuff on engineering. Like I mean, it's STEAM. So the good thing is I've set myself up to where I can just do whatever I want in STEAM. And
That's true.
If you love it, you love it. That's great. I mean, you can scroll through and you can get series, or you can just scroll through and be like, that should be like a really cool video. Like I'm gonna check it out. I'm gonna learn about Greenland sharks. Like, why not?
No, I love that. No, that's great. And for flexibility. I am kind of limited, even though I do break out of my mold a lot, where I'm like, you know what? I think I want to do a video on the history of Iron Gull Ink. I just feel like it, and I just do it, and nobody cares.
Yeah, yeah. Like you're telling
Sometimes
me,
I'll get comments that are like, this seems a little off topic for you. And I'm just like, leave me alone. I want to talk about the history of silent reading and the history of books. Like, I don't get off
yeah,
it's fine. So yeah,
honestly,
I think that's smart of you. But yeah, if you think of, because I also have my series called Ancient Lakes. So I do this
mm,
where I start by going, ancient lakes, ancient lakes, and people get really, that one's kind of sporadic based, there's not that many ancient lakes, so I'm going to run out of them if I do it too quickly. Versus haunted hydrology is a little bit more flexible. So yeah, it's kind of funny.
I am kind of curious, and I just want to hit you with this last question. I don't know, do you do like any like TikTok lives for your science communication, or are you just strictly videos? Is there a reason why you don't do lives? I have my own reasons why I don't really know if I want to, but like I'm gonna give it a try. But what do you have to say
No,
about them?
you should probably do it. I don't know, I'm 33, and I just, sometimes there's certain things where I'm like, no. I think it partially has to do with the fact that like I have zero interest in that type of media, and I
Hmm.
have trouble ever making any types of media that I have zero interest in. So for me, I'm not a Twitch person. I don't like it. I don't care about
Yeah.
that type of live stuff. And I guess it's like strange to be on my side of it. I think that, I don't know. So no, I don't ever do lives. I did a
I'm
live with my cat the other day. That was it. That was special. And I wasn't even in it. I was like, here's the cat. You can
I
watch the
love that.
cat. Yeah.
I love that. I'm kind of skeptical. I'm going to do one tomorrow, and it's going to be more casual because I feel like if we start to talk about the thing that I don't like about this is in lives, you can easily spread misinformation just because you're not doing thorough research beforehand. And I just don't know if I want to engage in that sort of activity because I don't want to give people wrong ideas or wrong information. I would rather just talk casually about like what's coming up on the podcast. What do I have for ideas in terms of the videos, and maybe more of a casual conversation. I don't want to dive into like I see a lot of people like having conversations with flat earthers and people that don't believe in evolution, and I'm just like I don't know if I really want to do that because I just feel like that's I don't want to be contentious my entire time on the platform. Like I just want it to be
Yeah.
fun and stuff. I'd like to have a beer and have people kind of figure out like, oh, this is who he is and this is what he wants to do and etc.
Yeah. I think I could probably do with more of that. I kind of have had trouble with, the one thing I think I've struggled with is that I don't always bridge the gap between the science person and the communicator and the art person and like the real person. Like I always joke that I'm like way more unhinged in real life than I am on my TikTok, obviously. And so sometimes people are like, you should have a podcast, and I'm just like, I'm not an expert in my field. I don't feel comfortable um having a colloquial conversation about some of these topics that I don't have on the top of my head. I mean, today you guys saw that I made even a few mistakes, even like here in this space. So I kind of feel a little bit like I agree with you that it feels like a way to spread misinformation just
Mhm.
by not having a script to go along with it. A script means at least I trust that I'm telling the
Yeah.
truth, and like I'm being as transparent about my research as possible, versus like this is just me just off the cuff, you
Oh
know.
yeah, and you know what? I have to do this like on a regular basis. Like every 2 weeks, I'm talking to somebody who definitely knows their stuff about said topics. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of work on my end that comes into just getting semi-prepared to have like sort of an intellectual conversation with somebody that knows way more than me about a topic. I mean, I do want to have that aspect of like, hey, I'm learning about this, that way, because I am in a lot of aspects, I'm learning a lot of stuff. And it's kind of almost like, the person that's listening or watching is also taking that same journey with me. They want to learn about sharks. They want to come listen to John Laven talk about, marine biology in terms of sharks and learn some cool stuff. And they're learning along with me, but they're also learning from me because I'm doing a lot of like, you know, behind the scenes deep dives. I'm not like, I studied physics, I studied engineering. I'm not a marine biologist, but I do find like evolution interesting. I find biology extremely interesting, genetics really interesting, a whole swath of just things that are cool. So the way I angle it is, no, I'm no expert, and I will claim I don't know something, which that's the bottom line. Everybody should do that.
Yeah.
But this is just me taking a fun journey and getting to learn from some like awesome people. So
Yeah, no, I love that. No, it's great. I had a blast. Thank you for having me
yeah,
in this
Gio.
space, despite the fact that I try to make sure people know that I'm not an expert in my field, but I have worked my ass off to try to have the background that you're talking about to be able to be comfortable with having those types of conversations and communicating science on the internet, which should be a sacred activity, should not be taken lightly.
I agree. Yeah, there's a big responsibility to that. And I think about that quite often. But Gio, honestly, just to wrap up, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast. Whenever I emailed you and you emailed me back, I was so hyped. I was like, no way. No way. Yeah. Because I'm like,
I always appreciate when people send me authentic emails. I try to respond to all of them. So
that's good.
yeah.
That's good.
More so than, oh my God, don't ever DM me on TikTok. I do not look at those DMs. So yeah.
I don't even think
and I'm like,
allow.
and don't look at my comment section on Instagram. I won't comment. I don't get in that action very often. But if you DM me on Instagram or you email me, then I will respond. So that's the sneaks for anybody who wants to sneak in. That's how you get in.
Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it. And we'll be in touch. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
That is all for this episode of Everything STEAM. I just wanted to take a quick second and thank Geo for taking the time to share her knowledge on the Great Lakes, art, science communication, and worldwide spooky hydrology. I highly recommend you give Geo a follow on TikTok just like I did. Her handle is @GeoDesaurus. Her overall link will be in the description. I would also love to mention my amazing team for their collective efforts to make this show happen. This podcast was edited by Ariel Piermont, marketed by Courtney Page, QC'd by Panyapit Erickson, and our episode art was created by Gabrielle Edmiston. After the episode, as always, please give our podcast a rating and review on whatever platform you get your podcasts on. We're always looking for that feedback, and that rating would greatly help us out in the fight against those nasty algorithms. Lastly, be sure to check us out on all the socials for podcast news, upcoming episodes, and just fun STEAM content. Just search Everything STEAM on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit to join in on the fun. Once again, thank you for watching or listening to Everything STEAM. I'm your host, Sam Stanford, and as always, stay curious.